It started with a single 911 call, a desperate voice reporting a brutal scene inside an Ellicott City apartment. 44-year-old mother, Shelaya Broadwater, had been found fatally stabbed. The suspected killer, not a stranger lurking in the shadows, but the man she had just promised to marry. His name? Rondale Dickerson. The couple had announced their engagement only a week before. What should have been a celebration of love and new beginnings instead ended in horror. How does a relationship turn from joy to tragedy so quickly? What unfolded between the proposal and the violent end? As investigators dug into the case, the details grew even more disturbing. A targeted attack, a child forced to discover their mother's body, and a fiancé found shirtless and bleeding miles away. This is not just a crime story, it is the story of trust betrayed, of love turned lethal, and of a community left to mourn a woman taken too soon. Stay with us as we unravel the shocking murder of Shelaya Broadwater and trace the dark path that led from engagement to devastation in just 7 days. If you believe in protecting those at risk, don't wait for another tragedy to strike. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and share these stories, because awareness can save lives. Before she became the subject of news headlines, before investigators pieced together timelines and charges, there was a woman, living her life, raising her children, and trying to build something hopeful. Her name was Shelaya Broadwater. She was 44 years old, a mother of 2, and she lived in Ellicott City, Maryland. Friends and family describe her not in dramatic terms but in deeply personal ones. Gentle, quiet, loving, and kind. Words that don't shout, but words that mean something to the people who knew her. Her cousin, Michael Handy, captured this sentiment in a heartbreaking tribute on social media. He wrote that Shelaya was a beautiful soul inside and out, and that her life reflected that softness. He described her as silent, quiet, loving, and pure in heart. Those who knew her remember the way she carried herself. Not loud, not brash, but steady. The kind of person who made space feel calmer just by being in it. For her children, she was not only a mother but also a role model, someone working to provide stability and care. She was known for putting family first, a woman of quiet strength who bore the ordinary but profound responsibilities of motherhood, school runs, household routines, and the unseen sacrifices that shape a home. Among friends, she was the one you could rely on to listen, the one who might not speak often, but when she did, her words carried sincerity. Her warmth made her memorable. To many, she was someone who lived with grace, even in the challenges of everyday life. Her community in Ellicott City, neighbors, extended family, friends, would later describe her as the kind of woman you didn't forget once you met her. She embodied a softness that stood out in a world that can so often feel harsh. In the days before her death, she was stepping into what should have been a joyful chapter of life. She had recently become engaged, a sign that she was looking toward the future with hope, planning a life not just for herself but for her children as well. For those closest to her, this news seemed like a promise of new beginnings, a reminder that happiness could still be found. And that's how we need to remember her, not defined by the way her life ended, but by the way she lived it, by her devotion as a mother, by the kindness that family and friends return to again and again when they describe her, and by the image of a woman who carried both strength and tenderness in equal measure. Because to tell this story properly, we cannot let the crime overshadow the person at the center of it. Shelaya Broadwater was more than a victim. She was a mother, a cousin, a friend, a beautiful soul inside and out. That is where her story begins. Beyond the headlines, there is a man who now figures tragically into this story, Rondale Lavon Dickerson, aged 34. His name appears in charging documents and news reports, but little is known about the private life behind it. Public records tie him to Mappsville, Virginia, where he resided before the events that would thrust him into national attention. Rondale Lavon Dickerson is the man charged with the tragic death of his fiancée, Shelaya Broadwater. The couple had recently become engaged on September 11, 2025, just a week before the fatal incident. Later that day, Dickerson was located at a nearby Walmart, shirtless and with cuts on his arms and hands. He was arrested and initially denied involvement in the crime, but later confessed after inconsistencies in his statements were pointed out. In many criminal cases like this, the background of the accused becomes a battleground. Character witnesses, past history, and behavioral patterns all play a role in how the story is ultimately told in court. Dickerson faces several charges, including first-degree murder, second-degree murder, assault, and home invasion. He was denied bail due to being considered a flight risk and a danger to the community. His next court appearance is scheduled for October 22, 2025. The morning of Thursday, September 18, 2025, began like any other in the quiet suburb of Ellicott City, Maryland. Families were getting ready for work and school. Neighbors were heading out for their routines. But inside one apartment on West Springs Drive, tension was already brewing before the sun had fully risen. At around 5 a.m., the silence of the building was broken by loud pounding on a door. According to charging documents later obtained by the press, the person at that door was 34-year-old Rondale Dickerson, the fiancé of 44-year-old Shelaya Broadwater. He was reportedly angry, banging loudly, demanding attention. Inside, Shelaya was upset by the disturbance, a detail her teenage child would later relay to investigators. The pounding eventually stopped, and the early morning hours gave way to what seemed like an ordinary Thursday. Neighbors came and went, unaware of the storm building behind closed doors. By the afternoon, that ordinary day turned to tragedy. At 3:06 p.m., Howard County Police received a frantic 911 call. On the other end of the line was Shelaya's 14-year-old child. They had just walked into the apartment and discovered their mother in the bathroom. She was unresponsive, suffering from multiple stab wounds, with blood everywhere, as later summarized in the emergency call. Officers rushed to the scene. When they entered the apartment on West Springs Drive, they confirmed what the child already knew. Shelaya Broadwater was dead. She was pronounced dead inside her home, the bathroom becoming the focal point of a violent crime scene. Investigators moved quickly to assess the scene. One of the first details stood out immediately. There were no signs of forced entry. The door had not been broken. Windows were intact. This was not a burglary gone wrong, not an opportunistic attack by a stranger. Police were confident enough to describe it publicly in a single word: targeted. The victim, they said, had been singled out by someone she knew. First responders secured the apartment and began documenting every inch. Crime scene technicians photographed the layout of the bathroom, the blood patterns, and the wounds. The sheer number of injuries painted a picture of rage, of a sustained attack rather than a single blow. The medical examiner's office later confirmed what detectives already suspected on site. The stab wounds were multiple, and they were fatal. Every detail added to the profile of a crime carried out with intent and violence. For investigators, this was procedure: establish a cause of death, preserve evidence, interview witnesses. But for the family, the day was already unimaginable. A child had been forced to discover their mother's body. A teenager had been the one to make the 911 call, setting in motion the arrival of squad cars and crime scene tape. The apartment building, once a backdrop of ordinary suburban life, was now ringed by police vehicles. Neighbors stood outside in disbelief as yellow tape sealed off the unit. For them, the idea that such violence could erupt inside a home just steps away was almost impossible to process. By the evening, the Howard County Police Department issued a statement. They confirmed the victim's identity as 44-year-old Shelaya Broadwater and told the public that she had been fatally stabbed inside her apartment. The case was under active investigation, but detectives reassured the community that this was a targeted attack and that there was no broader danger to the public. The official release was brief, clinical, as police communications always are. But behind that language was a brutal truth. A mother dead, a child traumatized, and a family suddenly thrown into grief. As daylight faded, investigators continued their work inside the apartment. Evidence was bagged and tagged. Notes were written. Witnesses were spoken to. The story of what happened in those final hours of Shelaya's life was beginning to take shape, though much remained unclear. What was clear, even in those first hours, was that this was not an act of randomness. This was intimate, calculated, and devastating. The 5:01 a.m. pounding on the door, the afternoon discovery in the bathroom, the lack of forced entry, all of it pointed to someone who knew Shelaya, someone with access, someone with intent. That Thursday in September ended with an apartment sealed by tape, a community in shock, and investigators preparing for what would become one of the most closely watched homicide cases in Howard County in years. As detectives worked the crime scene on West Springs Drive, their focus turned immediately to identifying a suspect. The evidence inside the apartment was clear. This was a targeted killing. The question was, by whom? From crime scene to suspect witness statements, including the account from Shelaya's 14-year-old child, gave investigators a critical lead. Earlier that morning, around 5 a.m., a man had been seen pounding on the apartment door. That man was identified as Rondale Lavon Dickerson, Shelaya's 34-year-old fiancé from Mapsville, Virginia. With his name and description, detectives began circulating alerts to patrol officers across Howard County. The hunt for Dickerson was now underway. The breakthrough. Later that same day, police were called to a Walmart in Ellicott City for a welfare check on a suspicious man. Store security reported escorting a shirtless individual out of the building. When officers arrived, they found him with cuts on his arms and hands. Injuries investigators believed were consistent with a violent struggle. That man was identified as Rondale Dickerson. Interrogation and confession. Once in custody, Dickerson was questioned by detectives. At first, he denied any involvement in Shelaya Broadwater's death, but investigators pressed him on inconsistencies in his story. According to charging documents, under the weight of the evidence, he eventually confessed. Formal charges. By that evening, Howard County Police held a press briefing. They announced that Dickerson had been formally charged with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, first-degree assault, home invasion. The charges reflected both the brutality of the attack and the alleged unlawful entry into Shelaya's home. At his first court appearance, prosecutors argued that Dickerson was a flight risk and a danger to the community. The judge agreed, ordering that he be held without bond. His next court date was scheduled for October 22, 2025, where prosecutors are expected to lay out more details of their case, and the defense will begin shaping its strategy. As news spread, Maryland residents were shaken. For friends and family, the arrest offered a measure of relief but no comfort. Shelaya's cousin, Michael Handy, captured the grief in a social media post. She was a beautiful soul inside and out, yet a coward chose violence against such a kind soul. The case against Dickerson is now in the hands of the courts. Prosecutors will rely on forensic evidence, witness accounts, and his own statements to secure a conviction. Investigators continue to withhold any official statement about motive. For now, the public is left with the brutal facts, the charges, and the unanswered question of why. What is certain is that this case will move forward, and that every step will be watched closely by a grieving family, a stunned community, and a justice system tasked with speaking for the woman who no longer can. Do you believe justice will truly be served in this case, and that the system will hold the accused fully accountable? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd like to hear what you think. When we tell the story of Shelaya Broadwater, we are left with a haunting truth. Sometimes the most dangerous places are not dark alleys or empty streets, but within relationships themselves. Shelaya was remembered as gentle, quiet, and loving. She was building a future, raising her children, and planning for new beginnings. Yet, within days of celebrating an engagement, her life was taken. The unanswered question, why, lingers. Police have described the killing as targeted, but no motive has been confirmed. That silence leaves a void, one filled only with grief for those left behind. What her story makes painfully clear is that tragedies like this are not abstract. They tear through families, traumatize children, and ripple across communities. They raise urgent questions. Are we listening when people signal distress in their relationships? Are there protections strong enough for those who may be in danger? And most importantly, how do we, as a society, confront the hidden crisis of intimate partner violence? The case against Rondale Dickerson will move forward in the courts. The legal system will decide guilt, punishment, and justice. But for Shelaya's loved ones, true justice is impossible, because it would mean her coming home. Her story is not just about a crime. It's about the fragility of life, the need for stronger systems of protection, and the importance of remembering the person at the center of the headlines. A mother, a friend, a beautiful soul inside and out. As we close this chapter, we honor Shelaya Broadwater not for the way her life ended, but for the way she lived it, with kindness, quiet strength, and love. May her story not be forgotten, and may it remind us all to fight for a world where no more lives are stolen by preventable violence,